Així, sí. Vale. Ho has engegat ja? Se'm sent? Can you hear me? So let's start. Sorry for the delay. And welcome to this seminar of research group REAQ, focus on rehabilitation and restoration in architecture. In fact, we started this morning at the School of Architecture with some interventions, let's say, more academics. We wanted the group to have this dual point of view, this dual attitude, in one side towards academic field and also towards professional world. In fact, this evening part is more focused on large housing estate, large residential housing, and also this professional point of view. The second part will start with some local point of view. We have some guests. I will start with a presentation also of the subject, and then we'll have Maria Cisternas. Maria Cisternas she's an architect and was responsible first in the City Hall of Barcelona and then in the Catalan government for the Incasòl, the housing institute, mainly devoted to the development of public housing in Catalonia. We were also expecting David Martínez, who didn't say. I was expecting him, but he didn't answer. So let's hope he will finally come. And then we will have two guests, two international guests, Professor Fabio Leprato from Milano Polytechnic, who will talk about his research also on large residential complexes and his article and also some intervention of his own. And then Sander Vermeulen from Holland, who won the European Mies Awards with the intervention in Weimar and also in Holland. So with this mixture of points of view from local and abroad, what we try is to get an answer, at the end we'll have a dialogue moderated by Marta Domènech, who will help to make a debate, a dialogue, some crossing opinions with our guests and different point of views, with the intention of getting some results of a problem that I think is well known and happens not only in Barcelona or Catalonia, but in Europe, in many other countries, in many other cities. Then how to deal with these obsolete programs of residential complexes and getting old with problems of social architecture and how to deal with this. So that will be the program. Local intervention, my own intervention as responsible for the research group, Maria Cisternas, waiting also for David Martínez, who is still, we trust he will come, and then Fabio Leprato and Sander Vermeulen. So I can start with my intervention. Okay, here. So I will mainly devote it to this activity, this competitive research of regenerating Barcelona, who is made by REAQ research group, GCTED, and Construaula, an construction enterprise. And as I said, this is mainly focusing the situation of large residential complexes in the metropolitan area of Barcelona. All these were built in the decade from the 50s, 60s, and 70s in the periphery of Barcelona, being built where land was possible to be occupied, and with this paradoxical situation that now all this is getting central, is getting in strategical situations, and there is not homogeneous situation, are different. Each one is different. Some of them, they have problems, social problems. Some of them have construction problems of being with some pathologies. Other are getting gentrified, are getting touristic. And what we tried is giving solutions, trying to deal with this situation. For instance, those are some pictures, so you can get an image of what is Barcelona like. This is Montbau at the time he was built, just in the limit from Collserola, and you see an initial ronda, no, an initial ronda just here, no, this kind of initial of road, and then this big effort of building several typologies. Probably Montbau is one of our best examples of social housing in these complexes with different typologies of having typologies of low housing program, vertical and towers, middle height, and also the main example of the civic square, dealing with this here, the civic square with these different blocks, was probably one of the best examples of modern public spaces, at least in Barcelona. La Verneda. It's useful to me to say that it's been disappeared. One of our main objectives is trying this is not happening anymore. Such an interesting examples of typologies, of clusters of people living in this, let's say, useful, rational, and that makes sense typology, generating public space with facilities, with this crossing in the ground floor. All this is being disappeared and is being reconstructed, doing new buildings that probably will have similar problems than the old ones. So again, generating all this garbage of destroying buildings, is going against circular economy, is doing against making profit of what already exists. So what are trying is to claim and to reinforce the idea of maintaining what already exists, preservations, maintenance, and taking advantage of what already exists. La Verneda. I like those pictures that shows what was Barcelona at that time. The idea of this really doing an effort for building social housing, some of them with great quality, not only in composition, in architecture, but also in construction, advanced types of construction of systems, and then with the worry for public spaces in this mixture of in an agricultural fields, doing those sorts of big operations. Nowadays, we are dealing with something that requires an urban point of view. It needs more permeability, more connection to the surroundings, the limits, the boundaries of all those ensembles needs being connected. Also needs some new programs for the housing, for the apartments. They need to be rethought in terms of what apartment needs nowadays. Probably they are too much divided. People living in an apartment now is 1.2 in Catalonia. Comparison in the 50 years was 4 point, I don't know. So really, the density of the apartment is much less now than what was at that time. Or another example, Passeig Calvell, just in front, that faces us to a Barcelona that already doesn't exist. A Barcelona where the sea was something to protect from. The sea was not seen as something touristic. It didn't exist, the beaches in Barcelona, this idea of being touristic and swimming, but was something dangerous, humid, and then the railway train was just here, no, in the crossing just in front. And those buildings facing south exactly, also generates what we think is interesting space public in between. And now this has become a touristic apartment. So it's not social anymore. You can consider this is not a problem, or you can consider it is. But social housing being rent and being used as a touristic place. And in Pobla Nou, all this original fisherman's neighborhood, with this relation that obviously has to be rethought and thinking what happens with this complex in relationship with Pobla Nou. Besòs, again, the same architects that in Montbau, Giraldez, López Iñigo, Subias, with this looking to Holland, this looking to the new modern movement, looking to Berlin also, Hansa Wirtel, we wanted, in Spain, they wanted to be like mid-Europe, copying the typologies and looking for the typologies in mid-Europe. And then Besòs is trying to demonstrate that with a modern movement, with blocks can also do good architecture, good public space, mixing again different typologies. You can see low density, this low density housing mixed with some also repeated blocks in middle height. And again, those impressive images of the Barcelona with the sea. You can see even the barracks, the self-construction buildings here, the houses. You see all these where beaches were used for people to self-construct things, places to live, emergency places to live. And then all these complex, as I said, with mixing low density with high density. And again, the problem that already exists of the limits, the boundaries, and how to make this not to become a ghetto, not to become something isolated from the rest of the city. Belvitge is again another of our well-known examples. All here, all facing south with this typology that, again, as I was telling you before, shows some problems of accessibility with an interesting system of construction of concrete walls being prefabricated at the same site, but then again with 13 stories high is again with a problem of accessibility because the stop of the elevator was a half floor. So again, from each floor you have to go up or down half a floor to take the elevator and to get out of the building. You see here these programs of three bedrooms, a small kitchen, a small bathroom, probably something that needs a readjustment of those surfaces, thinking of obviously in accessibility, but also thinking in a bigger services rooms and probably less bedrooms because less people is living today in those apartments. And then let me finish with the conclusion of the last activity that the REAQ group is developing is this competitive proposal that the City Hall and again the Bit Habitat, this innovation association of the City Hall of Barcelona, though this competition to find in regeneration residential buildings with innovative sustainable systems, something that was supposed to be modular, bioclimatic, photovoltaic, and addressing to several objectives at the same time, community, water, and a system that the competition was to build a prototype that was able to be in use, to build the prototype and then to check with 20 factors of temperature, humidity, density, heat, trying to see if this works to get improved and then to use it to put in those open buildings like we show in those images. See how could use this prototype to be just added something that can be added at those images show here to put elevators, to put stairs only punctually or even to short. So open system that can be modular and that can be used not only for one kind of buildings, but in general for all kind of situations. We won this competition, so the prototype is being built, a prototype that is only the ground floor, a typical floor, and a roof floor. So in a very small 4 meters, 2.5 meters, in a very small, that can only show what the impact would be and how would it work. So those are images of how can we imagine what would be to use it in those kind of large complexes, generating corridors, generating spaces to meet people, spaces where the nature can be used in a more intensive way, with wood, with also making a system of regenerating the water, using the water of the rain for the same nature that is in those outside spaces. The roof would take this photovoltaic roof, and then again more spaces to meet and use it to connect with the existing building. Imagine all those systems being added to an existing block. And the construction, some images that shows you is a dry construction that can be easily dismounted and mounted with wood with system of being 2 columns and then the beam just in the middle, in this easy to mount, easy to be mounted and dismounted with this very modular system of construction, with well-known systems of windows, materials, because the innovation is not in the specific solutions, but is in the way to putting all them together and to putting just in front of the existing buildings. With the cork for the walls is being demonstrated an excellent acoustic isolation. All this is being measured acoustics, temperature, as I said, wind, CO2. All this is being tested, and let's say the conclusion are still being on, but we are very optimistic against the results of these tests. Ventilation of the system, of the windows, nature, wood, the sunshade. So let's say it's nothing complicated. It's nothing complicated because the facade that faces the sun can be protected. It can be really as ventilated spaces where you can reduce your exposure to the outside, so you can get some comfort just regulating the amount of exposition to the outside. And all the parameters, luminosity, noise, all these things being with those central of elements, of prototypes that can be that sends all the information. And nowadays, because one of our groups of research is especially devoted to this thing, is being worked, is being developed, and we'll get soon final conclusions about all this. This is a far view of the prototype. As I said, the ground floor, the typical floor and the roof, a small one, but as I said, that can be easily imagined, that this can be extended, can grow, and can be used. Not only this can be easily adapted to different structures, different modulation. It can be used to provide accessibility elements, also provide exterior elements. So let's say that the system is an open system, that what they want is to be more absolutely flexible and being to give solutions for a lot of different buildings. The system won the Foundation European Research Prize, the SOM Foundation. So now we've also been testing and doing some academical works for the SOM Foundation. And finally, this is some of the views of how we'll resolve the application of the system to some of the buildings I showed you before, some of the polygons, some of the large residential complexes would be something like this, with this open system of adding this boot structure, these boot community spaces to the existing buildings. Thank you very much. Well, I already introduced the next guest, Maria Cisternas. I already did it, but just to remind, no, she's been responsible in the City Hall of Barcelona, let's say many years ago, but recently was for 2 years responsible in the Catalan government for the Incasol agency. Let's say the Incasol is the agency that is responsible for all the housing development in Catalonia. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Pere Joan and Sarah, for inviting me. My problem is that every time that I write, I have to read more. And I have taken the opportunity to understand why Spain has this legacy, and in particular, why Catalonia has this public heritage in terms of social housing building. So my explanation is going to start some years before the construction of these massive housing estates, but be patient, we'll get there. we'll end up explaining what can be done or what the Catalan administration is trying to do. How big is the Catalonia's housing problem? Is there enough housing for everyone? Why build if there are still so many empty buildings? What level of intervention should be expected from public authorities? Why does Catalonia have a ridiculous, affordable rental housing stock? These are the current questions that are being debated in academia and in professional sectors in recent years as a response to the growing difficulty of accessing rental housing in large cities. I cannot address all these issues in this small contribution, but I will try to stick my explanation on the activity of Catalan government until the 80s. That is the activity of public administrations in matters of housing and its involvement in the promotion of public housing. And I will defend that we have to go up to the Civil War and understand that the legacy of Franco dictatorship and the lack of investment in land and housing policies after the dictatorship have compromised the present and the future of the next generations. Because apart from having to expand the public rental stock, the Generalitat de Catalunya, the public sector, has had to deal with a housing emergency now in parallel to the regeneration of the heritage that it inherited. Only the management of these existing homes has taken up a large part of public housing resources, which have not been destined, have not been allocated to the construction of new public housing. And unfortunately, the public funds to promote, to develop affordable housing have been transferred historically to private hands, to small private owners. That is why we are where we are, without effective ability to significantly grow a built-up park of affordable apartments. Catalonia has an interesting regional distribution. Everything from, we have 941 municipalities, from the smallest one in the mountains, mostly, to small cities of 10,000 to 20,000 inhabitants. This is not from Catalonia, it's in Mallorca, but I adore this square. So, but Mallorca has very similar qualities in terms of urban heritage. And this is how our old town looks like. This is Manresa. So the way the city looks, the historical city looks, which is a heritage that has, I think that has demonstrated its ability to transform to many usages. How big is Catalonia? I always try to explain that Catalonia has the size of Switzerland. Switzerland has around 9 million inhabitants, or the Netherlands that has, it's the same surface. although these countries are larger in terms of density. The Netherlands has 17 million inhabitants. And Catalonia would have, if we superimpose it to the east coast of the United States, it would have the same distance from New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington. And this would account in terms of Catalan cities, from, let's say, Llançà to Las Casas d'Alcanar. Now, in the United States, there are millions of people living, working there. In Catalonia, it's 8 million people. Data to compare why Spain urbanized later than the rest of the European cities. By the way, this is an image of the functional areas of European cities. And as you see, one can tell that Spain is less urbanized than urban centers in Europe. While the metro was being built, while the subway was being built in London in the 1930s, in Barcelona, the streets of l'Eixample were paved. If London had 2.4 million inhabitants in 1845, Barcelona had only 240,000 in 1860. So that's the amount. It was, our capital was 10 times less than the population of London. And then it's taken years and years to build cities, right? This is, I live in Girona, I don't live in Barcelona, and this is my initial drawings to understand the urban plan of Girona. Girona is a very complicated city to draw. Don't try it, it takes time. It's ubicated in the river Ter, in this place where the river has affluence. It is highly conditionated by topography. In red, you have the Roman lines and the Roman settlements in Sarrià and Girona, right? And this is how the city looks like, which has still the shape of the river, of the four rivers that have allocated the urban growth of a city like Girona, which is one of the capital of the provinces of Catalonia. What did we have before? How does Barcelona look like during the Civil War or before the Civil War? Mainly, it has the Old Town, which has a very high density. You have to think that the density here was around 890 inhabitants per hectare. Cities like Paris had 350, or Madrid had 380. And this was what made public authorities to set up competition to enlarge the city and make it grow in a very significant way, in a way that has lasted for 150 years. As you know, this is the ideal of Cerdà, the Eixample law. In Spain, not only Barcelona had an Eixample, it was a law intended to make the private sector to contribute to the development of the city. And it was a way that was conceived as the most equal possible ways to allow developing rights to property owners. The Eixamples became a recognized method for parceling out land and building on it according to an expected level of buildability or heights. What happened was that the final materialization of the plan had to understand the tensions between the market and the owners. You have to think that the owners were not real estate developers. What they were industrial manufacturers that had owned a little bit money, and they were learning how to invest it and to develop the city. The final materialization of the plan multiplicated the net floor index per block. It started as 2 square meters of roof per square meter of floor. in 1857, it increased to 3.5, and it ended in 468 in only a scope of 40 years, of 30 years. That is to say that in just only 30 years, the density more than doubled. This was a method to allocate the growth of the population. The economic perspective was the industrialization of the cities, the construction of the railway along the Catalan cities. And this was a system that in a way tried to be equal to the property owners and allowed to allocate more and more population, even if it was not the ideal of Sardà. The final image of l'Eixample, as Sardà conceived it, has been very expensive for the city of Barcelona. This is an operation made by the city council to regain the public space of the interior of the blocks. But this has costed the expropriation of the private owners, because typically one of these urban blocks looks like this, right? It's been completely privatized, and it allocated all sorts of uses, either commerce or other uses. Not only Barcelona grew with the technique of l'Eixample, but most of the Catalan cities, Mataró, Vilanovas, Vilafrancas, Martorell, grew up with this idea of a certain grid. It was a method that was useful to everyone. Was it so egalitarian? It was egalitarian because it treated equally property owners. My point of view is that it was not egalitarian to the people who could not allow to be there, to the people who didn't own the land, right? And the proof of that is that those people had to live in other contexts. What this Eixample's law did was to make allocations for sometimes the urban blocks were not built as residential, but as for public amenities, a hospital, a market, a church, or a heritage program. What it didn't allocate was, what it didn't reserve, it didn't think that maybe part of this land should allocate social housing. And so it was fully privatized. Also because at that time, it was expected that the subdivision of the housing itself would allow for different affordabilities of housing apartments. And then in the 30s, we had the Pla Macià. Pla Macià was this idea of the Republican architects to think in a long term. And I think we owe them the thought that we also needed a central park. Our central park was the Delta del Llobregat, right? It was an agrarian space that had to be preserved from urban growth. So there was a certain planification, territorial view of what the limits of the city would be. And then the Civil War came. This country was devastated, as you know. It lost a significant amount of population, young people mainly. And until the 40s, let's say, from the 40s to the 50s, there was no much construction of new housing. The level of poverty and of devastation the Civil War left made it for thousands of people to migrate from the agrarian sites to cities. Because at least in the city, you would have the opportunity to work in something. Maybe you could not have a house, but you could work in something. It is estimated that between 1960 and 1974, 1.4 million people arrived in the Barcelona area. Those people could not be allocated in the Eixamples. They could not afford to live in the central city. And the central city probably was already full of people and overdeveloped. So at some point during the 60s, what one could find in our cities was that cities were densifying. That was a lot of precarious and over-occupied housing, subletting issues. Warehouses, shops, and all kinds of places were filled with people who didn't have a decent place. And slums, in a way, become the individual alternative to the lack of planification of the regime. It was a time of self-construction, and the city of Barcelona was full of barracks. Not only Barcelona, but all the cities of Catalonia that had any industrial activity suffered from the same. And what happened? Of course, the population growth. This is an image from the book from Solans. They're beautiful images explaining how the regime explained the economic growth of the expansion of the city, both in Madrid and Barcelona. But of course, there was a pressure at some point. In the 60s, somebody was really facing the pressure to allocate these people. If you see the growth of Catalonia, we are talking about these years, this days here. These are the Barracas del Carmel, which were where the land was cheap, where there were no property owners that could force people, that could evict people, right? While in England, we had the new towns and the conception that suburban expansion had to be limited. Here in Spain, Franco created the neighborhood abortion units and all sorts of urgent urban actions to build in a very short period of time to allocate all these people. It was the industrialization of housing. Whereas one probably has shown the best architectonic examples. I'm talking about the other side, which I don't. It's not. It doesn't tell much so good of our profession, but it has to be recognized that this reality also existed, right? And it's very difficult, very unrecognized, and it will have to be addressed in the coming years. What does it say? First of all, why are we where we are? Because in the 57, there was this new law of subsidized housing. What this says is that it wants to bring private initiative to the construction of housing. They are allocating funds. They are given money to that the state doesn't want to recuperate back. It was given to the private developers so that they could build in very few time these homes. And then the same law said that these buildings that received a lot of public money could be sold, right? This is the story of the privatization of the housing stock of Spain. Despite the fact that much of the construction costs were subsidized with public funds, it was not foreseen that they would have to be kept at an unlimited affordable rent regime, which happened in other contexts in Europe. The urban planning tools were designed to build these housing emergencies. I think Pere-Joan has shown the best examples. Because at the beginning, the first massive housing estates were built within the city. They were built juxtaposed to the existing neighborhood. So there was a kind of social mixture, and one could walk or take the train to get there. Then the coming years, it was not the same. What happened was that el Instituto Nacional de la Vivienda y la Obra Sindical del Hogar, which were the ministry public companies to build this housing, chose locations with very low acquisition costs because it had to build a lot in very few time. And this condition that, for example, they bought the land who nobody wanted next to the highways. When you go to San Roque, Badalona, you can tell why they chose this area, right? And this also created an unprecedented production model. The small and family developers that had been the Eixample had to multiply the rhythm of construction for 10, for 20, or for 50. So large investors and also banks entered the housing activity. So it was, in a way, it was the physical construction of a segregated heritage, badly built, and which ended up in private hands in somehow, or in some occasions remained public. Those that the state kept for it as public, then when the dictatorship ended, entered the heritage of the Catalan government. If you see, this is a chart of the amount of buildings for decades that were being built. So if Spain had 8 million homes before 1970s, you can see the pace of construction, and then how it stops with the bubble. It goes down really significantly. The story of the migrants that came from all around Spain has been told, maybe not as told as it should. In this book, Francesc Candel explains how people, his friends that come, he himself was from Valencia, and other acquaintances that he had come those years to Barcelona. He says, in the blocks where my priest friend lives, they paid 15,000 pesetas as an entry. For 20 or 30 years, they will pay about 300 pesetas a month, and then a little more for I don't know how many years. After 50 years, the flat will be yours. That was the equation. It's very simple. I always put this image. This image, to me, represents part of a caricature of what really happened. This is an area in Badia del Vallès, in which, if you're not from Spain, maybe you're not familiar with the drawing, but this is the map of Spain, right? So this would be the Mediterranean, the Valencia coast, Andalusia, Portugal. It exists. It houses, by the way, El Mago Pop, who's a very bright musician, was born here. Lots of interesting people have lived here, and they always say it was a very good massive housing estate. It's true. I mean, one can have a bright life in every place. It does not depend only on the morphology of the place. People have souls and all sorts of life, but we have to admit that this was the solution that the government gave. Of course, it was place segregated by the highway last, and then you can see the rest of the city. Right? I have taken this image from a very old article from Ignacio Paricio, in which he tells how the same, and probably this, Pere Joan has explained it many times, but when I read it, it made me think how the same typology of flats were built all around the city. Right? So all these high-density housing estates had more or less the same typology. Then, so we have now finished do I have time? Because I think, okay. If you're not bored, I will now get to the creation of the Generalitat de Catalunya. The dictator Franco dies in 1975, and one of the first laws that the Catalan government creates is the creation of the Catalan Land Institute that really tried to build completely different than what its predecessors had built. Why do I put this article? I think the law is very interesting to read, but Article 11 tells us the economics in which it was created. It was created with the assets and rights acquired by the Generalitat that came from the Instituto Nacional de la Urbanización. So the heritage that Incasòl has to operate were these housing estates, with all the maintenance cost, the burden, the financial burden, the debts that had to be paid to the banks, and the difficulty to integrate all these people in the rest of the city. It also said the allocation that will be fixed to the Catalan Land Institute is the state budget, el Estado, or directly by the Generalitat, for the fulfillment of the purposes of the Institute. This has never happened. There has never been public money for the provision of public housing in l'Incasòl. Why has it existed? Because it operated in a very intelligent way. It bought cheap land, rural land. It did the urban plan. They had in mind, they collaborated a lot with the director of urban planning, and then they sold the final flats, both in social housing and free market housing. So this is the royal decrees for which in the 80s the heritage of INUR and the IPPV transfers to the Generalitat. And you can see in the original documents the massive housing estates. All of this is Igualada, la Serra del Llobregat, Tarragona, Vic. And these are pieces of cities that they did. I have also included this case. This is a very interesting case also. The INUR, the ministry during the dictatorship, invented the ACTUR, Actuaciones Urbanísticas Urgentes, to obtain land for large housing extensions. This is a la plana de Gallecs, and it was thought as a new city. And they bought it, and it's not that they bought it, they expropriated it. So people that run the rural exploitations were forced to sell their land. What happened is that by 1970s, people had enough of these housing estates. So this created a huge social reaction, and what the Incasòl did was to preserve it as a response to these massive housing estates. It preserved it from development. So now we are in another issue, which is that other large land reserves, for example, near Colònia Güell, a la platja llarga Vilanova, l'àrea de Can Reixac de Montraga, or other pieces of public land that were bought with public money to develop housing, social housing units, do not have the social license now, because people would not like these places, which have, some of them have very environmental high value, to be developed. That's another issue. We don't want to develop the land that the other generations bought some years ago. This is, for example, the type of homes that Incasòl has. There was even the creation of an agency to manage these housing properties that was called Adixa. And this is one of the buildings in Girona, where I live. It's difficult to regenerate these buildings. And this is, for example, one of the, with el traspaso del INUR, no? Del Prat a Sant Cosme, Incasòl made a huge effort to regenerate it, to ameliorate the quality of the built environment. But I would say it's a very complex issue. It's difficult to say it in a short way, but in a way, the segregation and the isolation of this part of the population from the city of El Prat has has created an enclave perfect for having empty apartments. And what happens when you have empty apartments? There's somebody who fills them with all sorts of illegal activities. And then what happened? Also happened that in the 90s, a lot of the homes built with the time of emergency collapsed because of aluminosis, because the quality of the housing was really poor, and there were people who died, and there were huge housing estates that had to be evicted from one day to another and be rebuilt or regenerated. I'm not going to go through all the examples, but this one has made me think a lot. In Suria, no? Suria is an industrial, industrial chemical municipality in which there were some mines. And this attracted a lot of populations to work in the mines. What happened? Typically, the city council cannot afford to build the homes for people. So the city council went to the ministry, they gave the land to the ministries to build the homes. And again, what happened some years later was that the poor construction of the site obliged to remake all the I'm going to explain it in a way. What the Ingasol did was to make a reconstruction project to rehabilitate this house. It was signed by structural specialist Carles Buixader and Joan Margarit, and it was completed in 2008. So it is a paradigmatic case of what the legacy of housing means of the urgency built by Franco. No? A precarious construction that took a few years to build. It was built in 5 years. It took 38 years of repair. Why? Because once it is built, you have to think how you rehabilitate it with the people inside it. And then it's much more complicated. So in a way, in Catalonia, we have had to do twice the housing estates. No? At the end, the state transferred Salipot to the Generalitat, and the Generalitat invested 24 million of public resources to rehouse these people. This was a necessary action, of course, but in terms of economics, it generated deficit because it did not help to increase the public park. The flats were paid for 2 or 3 times. Another operation is in Sant Roc, in Badalona. Sant Roc was one of these areas near. It's in Badalona, so the second city of Catalonia next to Barcelona. It's metropolitan area. There was the construction of the highway, and the initial plan was to build these massive housing estates. As you see, why do you see colors here? Because besides the architectural technique, the difficulty was to build the first building to reallocate people, then tear down the second building, then reallocate people. Then this is why it takes 40 years, because you have to negotiate with every single property owner. In this case, with more difficulty, because these people had flats of 30 to 50 meters. It was considered that they could have right to more surface, but then it was difficult to compensate them, to make them pay the compensation. This is how the final intervention looks like. And as you see, what has been built in a way replicates. The construction of the housing is much better. These new buildings have interesting standards, but they don't look so much different. Also, you have to think that in the middle, in the 1976, the general metropolitan plan was approved, and all sorts of urban plans arrived, and now you would never build such a dense area. You would create much more green spaces, you would allocate more amenities, a library, a swimming pool, a school. So the difficulty here, it was impossible to bring in new people with different affluent capacities. So the mixture, which is the basis of urban generation, was very difficult. Linkasol, I have written here some of the interesting cases that you might want to look at that were inheritances of the ministry. But this, when the regeneration of pathologies ended, there was the issue of how to regenerate the neighborhood, not only the blocks, but the neighborhood. And another day, maybe we can evaluate the impact of La Llei de Barris, which was a law that tried to enter not in the block itself, but what was in the middle, in the quality of the streets, in putting lifts where the blocks didn't have lifts, in creating public amenities in all those neighborhoods. And Incasol was also a very significant actor in the development of this law, which, by the way, the new government is trying to rethink how this new law of neighborhoods will develop. And to end up, some considerations to discuss, maybe we can discuss them later, is the fact that the emergency housing was built in a very short time, but it takes a lot of time to be rebuilt. There was a premise that the population's routing strategy was out of question. This is a very good principle, I think, to give people the right to grow where they lived, and it prevents from gentrification. But in a way, it has been said also that this segregation that produced by the migration flows is perpetuated. The right of housing in property, what implications does it have? Do we need more rental or more property? Now the official protection qualifications are still valid and should be maintained in perpetuity. You have to think that traditionally after 10 or 20 years, the public housing could be transferred to market housing. I have already commented on the standards, on the difficulty to have more green spaces and more social services. The slowness, it takes years and years to develop these processes, and the chronic lack of funding for housing policies that compromises also the right to rehousing. And here I end. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Maria Cisternas. Now continuing with Professor Leprato, that I already presented, but again from Politecnico Milano. Welcome, and we listen to you.
Okay, so thank you. I'm very happy to be here, so thank you for inviting me. This intervention I prepared for today, you said it's professional evening, but I'm a professor, so yeah, I'm rather academic, although I will present some also practical activities, two projects that we developed at the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies at Politecnico di Milano. But before I will start with some research stuff from what I've done for my PhD dissertation that was discussed some years ago, which is probably the reason why I'm here. So a few years ago I published this article on a Dutch journal of housing, which was called Housing Bricolage. Then I will explain the reason of the title. And this article is a synthesis of what I've done as a research during my PhD. In those years, I tried to find out, to study and to deepen the issue of housing transformation, housing regeneration, knowing that since the 90s there has been, even from year to year, more and more activities on housing refurbishment all over Europe. Not in all Europe, I would say, less in Italy, maybe not in Spain, but in Central Europe there has been many multiplication of interventions. And with my research, research activity, I wanted to find out whether we could first define a group, a mass of case studies, but then to find out, to bring some new knowledge somehow to our discipline, which means to go from the specificity of some inspiring projects that I've selected to the general adaptive solutions. So to general, let's say, more general actions that we can grasp from the case studies and that can inspire future transformations. So this intervention today, I've divided it in 3 parts. It can be long, but maybe I will skip some parts if it's too long. I will provide a very short framework in 3 main statements, let's say, that I would like to anticipate before entering and seeing some projects, but I would like to say 3, let's say, more theoretical things. Then I will present the outcomes of the articles. So the idea of defining a toolkit that could inspire new projects. Some of the students already, I'm sorry for you, you already had a part of this presentation a week ago, but yeah. And then finally 2 projects that we developed at Politecnico in Milan. So the first statement I would like to start is that the renovation or rehabilitation, then we can use all the synonyms, but it's an act of creation. So I think that we really have to consider as an architect, as architects or urban designer, that it's not a matter of maintenance. It's not a matter of a technical task. Of course, we have maintenance and technical issues, but first of all, it's a creative challenge, and it can be interpreted as something new. The project on the existing has the same creativity and the same inventive potential than a project on a let's say new plot. And I think that this is always important to be stated, because in many cases, at least in Italy, the maintenance part of public housing goes directly in a let's say in a technical side of the housing companies, which is devoted to maintenance and never to think to add new ideas. And I think that it's always important to state that by working on those areas, we can add new ideas to the existing one. We can reevaluate some old ideas that maybe got in some troubles. We can also erase some things that didn't work and do something new over it. And I think this is, let's say, important. And this idea of considering renovation an act of creation actually comes from that subtitle of this nice exhibition that was held in Paris in 2015. It was called Un bâtiment combien de vies, one building, how many lives? It was not just about housing. There were many other, let's say, refurbishment or renovation activities. But the subtitle was La transformation comme acte de création. And the curator, Francis Rambert, of this exhibition, when he was talking about mass housing, he was talking about la reconquête du banal, reconquering the banal, the ordinary, by stating that the schematism of those buildings can become a sort of generic basis to setting up some architectural variations. So the second statement is, in renovation, the architect is a scientist, but at the same time also a bricoleur. This comes from the idea of The Savage Mind by Claude Lévi-Strauss, who is stating that there are 2 sorts of minds: the practical skills of the bricoleur and the engineer, and the artist is the one who is able to combine both. And I think also the architect dealing with renovation has to combine the practical skill of create new meanings by assembling stuff, assembling things that are already in a place and to work with the fragments, but sometimes to keep some fragments that are already there, but we need to give them new meanings, maybe in an urban layout or in a building system. But at the same time, we also have the scientific part of our discipline that can help us to invent or to find out new tools that can be added to those places in order maybe to solve some problems. So we combine our theoretical part of the discipline together with the ability of the bricoleur. And for instance, well, that's just an example, but to move from that modernist open unit, well, with all the characters of the modernism, so open space, fluid space, no difference inside and outside, no hierarchy in open spaces, and if we want to move it to this final hybrid block, which is clearly separating exterior and interior, giving a semi-private space separate from the most public part of the city and all those intermediate areas. Well, we have to recognize the value of the existing and then to take some decisions like a bricoleur would do. So to catalog, then to decide what can be dismantled, what can be kept, and what can be maybe reassembled with something else. And so we are here. Well, this is an example in the Netherlands. I did my PhD in between Milan and Delft, so there will be many Dutch examples. But as I told you, this new urban block is just keeping the tallest building as well, with some refurbishment, and all the rest is something new that it's changing the idea of city that is representing in this place. And the third statement I would like to say is that the best project is the one that achieved the greatest impact with the minimum intervention. So every time there are, and then in the toolkit that I will show you, we will see, let's say, great number of activities that can be done, and one could think that we can theoretically do many stuff, many things, but I think that the clever project, it's a project that managed to really understand where are the problems and to concentrate resources and concentrate design actions in those specific places, because we know that doesn't need to be said, but resources for public or social housing, they are not a lot, they are very few resources. So we always have to find the specific intervention and the smallest intervention possible to solve, not reducing the goals, but to keep the high goals, solving issues with less radical, less intense transformations. So I pass to the second part of the presentation, in which we will pass through this toolkit, which I organized into 7 points. As I told you before, the idea was to grasp ideas, but then to make a sort of matrix and to have in order. So I decided to order them according to the point of application. There are 5 points that works at the building scale, ground level, roof level, facade, typology, and building morphology, and then 2 that are working on the urban design. And this is a catalog that I consider an open catalog that can be, of course, enriched and can evolve over time. So that's now, we don't have, of course, enough time, but that I will just pass through some of those images, and that will be the opportunity to see some project without entering too much into detail, of course. But when we speak about ground level, we know that this is a crucial point of contact between the building and the open space, and in many cases in all Europe, in social housing and mass housing production, this level was poorly considered. Storages, car parkings, or also maybe simple apartments that are like the ones at the upper floors, but they are just facing the street, so they are more insecure and they have problem of privacy and whatever. And in most cases, there was not the idea of having maybe a different housing typology on those floors. So in most of those activities, of those, let's say, schemes that you can see here, the work is to try to find out a new, different way to relate the housing activity with the city, or adding functions or changing the housing typologies. And this is, for instance, what can be seen in many cases, blind walls hiding storages, cellars, storages. and those are some of the sections that are showing very quickly that many things can be done to add new ideas on these schematic ground floors. And we are again in the Netherlands, and this is one of a project I like because it's really, I think, minimum, and it really goes along with the idea of not having a radical transformation. So in this case, for instance, the storages are at the ground floor, and they will still be at the ground floor, by the idea to change the scale of the ground floor and to change this perception of dealing with the building that doesn't have any sort of permeability with the exterior and become immediately less safe, because you don't expect anybody to open those doors. The doors on the ground floor, and the before image, they are just storages. So that also makes a place around less safe, while in the second design, with the simple idea of removing the first gallery and adding single stairs that reach the doors, that makes all the facade a place where people can open the door, go out, and activate a bit more, could say, the open space. Of course, it's not like having a new shop, a cafe, but that's already something. And also the windows of the kitchens, for instance, they are now facing directly outside, and that means there is a more social control of the open space. And on the other side, by just lifting the level of the soil, they decided to cover that blind wall and to allow the apartment at the first floor to have a bigger private open space directly connected to the park, which is on the backyard of the building. And this is another way of making the building much more permeable by keeping the residential functions and not thinking that we have to add other functions that in many cases are not able to survive, let's say, from commercial activities, as often they do not survive. And now we are in the Bijlmer. I think we will see another building later, but this is a project done, I think, 10 years before, or maybe also 15 years before, 10 to 15 years before. I think a bit more radical than the one we will see later. And in this case, the same happened, more or less. The cellars, the storages were turned into duplex atelier, but as those duplex atelier were not, the building footprint was not enough, they decided to enlarge the plinth with this like duplex structure that is added, and I think it's quite clear in the drawings. And then we see the two facades. Of course, there is also a work on the facades, sort of revamping, but that's not the interesting part, I think, of this project. What I think it's interesting is to see the ground floor that become a place with many doors instead of a blind wall, with many doors open to spaces that are spaces to live, but also spaces to work. And also this idea of overcoming the functionalistic approach and having typologies that can be both work, home, or work and home together. It's a way to produce a typology that is able to profit of being at the ground floor, instead of being a typology that needs to put fences. That's a typology that is, let's say, happy to be at the ground floor, because they also solve the privacy issue thanks to the duplex typology that brings maybe the sleeping rooms above and leave the living rooms downstairs. It's spaces that are more easy to be open. I have to go faster, and I will do that. But if we go to the roof level, of course, there can be several options. You can add in a mimetic way. You can add by declaring that you are adding a new architecture on the roof, or you can dig and reduce the scale of the building. So in this case, that's in Italy, in Milan, a case in which the roof was considered as a new soil for a new, completely different architecture that I think completely changed the image of the entire building, although they're not solving the other problems. That's mainly a matter of densification. Or in this case, in Germany, where there was the need to reduce the density because there was a decreasing of the population. That's the former DDR, So they reduced population, and they decided to reduce the scale of the building. Instead of demolishing some buildings, they just reduced of half of most of those buildings. They are buildings built with the Plattenbau system, so they can be dismantled. And I think this section is really interesting because you see you lose 2 floors, and the other floors you lose half of them. So that makes those apartments become more sort of terrace houses, in which the floors at the first floor open to the exterior, and the third floor has its own terrace like the last floor. And I think this is another interesting way to work both on the roof, let's say, and on the volume. And if we go to the thickness of the facade, well, this is known. We can add layers like the Laccatone Vassal, let's say, way of doing, or others, or we can add simple balconies or some elements that has the goal also to enlarge the spaces of very small apartments, giving the opportunity to have bigger windows and maybe a small space that can somehow give more quality, punctual quality to the apartment. So if you are used to have this facade with small window, 30 centimeter thickness of facade, the idea now becomes to have 2-meter thickness of facade and to make that space more livable. So in this case, in Paris, you see the building without any balcony becomes a completely new building, and also the image of the building change. And this is something creative and innovative because it's about architecture in the way the building looks completely different, by also adding all the insulation layers and whatever, and a new small space to give a bit more of quality to the internal spaces. And I like very much this case because that has been developed by keeping the inhabitants inside the building during the work, with an interesting structural solution, because that all this new layer is hung to the roof, and it's not leading the loads to the soil. Well, I'm not explaining, but that was just to say the next step is to add also the winter garden, like Laccatone Vassal in this case, to the Ballepret, that changes the facade 3 times. And that give me only the occasion to say that when we do a transformation, probably we have also to think that this is not going to be the last intervention of the building, but an incremental activities that maybe will change again and again. And then there are also many other ways. In this case, you see linear wooden balconies for the living room, or pop-up loggias that grew in front of an existing facade. And now if we go to the typological articulation, this is a way, I think, to solve many problems, the aging of the population and whatever, but also to do a sort of destandardization. So we know that mass housing, they didn't have, they were, in most cases, they standardized a lot, the dwelling, because they were thought for a more standard society, 2 or 3 typologies that were, let's say, good enough for that probably period. But now, well, things has changed, family structure has changed, the role between home and work has changed, so everybody has different needs. And I think that working on typology also means working with the standardization. So yeah, the similar floor plan that can be transformed, in this case, in Amsterdam, a building with 40 apartments that were all the same, plus the ground floor with parking lots and storages, became a building with a bit 30, 32, I don't remember, all different apartments, like with this sort of Tetris activity. So the building, of course, was empty by the population. It was sold. It was, let's say, considered to be with this tunnel structure, tunnel concrete structure, a sort of matrix in which it was possible to redo all the perimeter of each single unit, and also have some units that can climb over the roof or can enlarge in the ground floor, having some duplex like before, that are spaces that can be both housing or something else, and also climbing on the roof to get view and to conquer a bit the space of the roof. And here are just an image that shows that, like those little differences, few balconies that are appearing in front of the new living rooms, and those light elements on the roof, and the glass facade on the ground floor that makes able to look through the building. They are the only, let's say, the main differences from the two phases, but they makes clear the idea of the standardization. And then if we go to the building morphology, but that allows a complete metamorphosis, because it's a way of working with the mass, of cutting, adding, or also incorporating a building within another building. And this is, well, some of the cases, and we will concentrate very quickly on two. This one, it's from the same architect of the one we saw before in the Plattenbau, in the same architect and the same district. He did 7 projects in the same district, experimenting different levels of radicalities. So I suggest to the students to see this intervention. And this is the last one, the most radical, by let's say reducing the density and having 8 urban, like sort of townhouses, urban villas, instead of this 100-meter bar, thanks again to the Plattenbau system that could be dismantled. Or again, by Lacatone Vassal, a more radical idea, not only having a thickest facade than before, a thicker facade than before, but to incorporating that old tower inside another building, and by doing so they also double, or even maybe more, the density. And this is happening still with dry construction that can climb, incorporating the former building, until the moment in which the former building is no more visible and no more recognizable at all. And we pass now to we change scale. I think that it's always important to combine, because some architectural problems can be solved at the urban scale, and also the opposite, let's say. So when we speak about urban morphology, I think that gives us the opportunity to change the idea of city, and maybe also overcoming some modernist ideas that maybe have not completely worked, or not worked at all. And what we see in most cases is the fact that we are somehow maybe coming back to the urban block, or to the open or closed block, but that it's much more separating public, semi-public, adding hierarchy to open spaces, adding new streets and roads. Right. And if we look at those 3 cases, well, it's clear, and from the yellow and red demolition and construction, that's really the attempt to bring a new idea of city, overcoming the previous one. The first one working with the idea of block, that's the one we saw at the beginning of this presentation. The second one we saw also the detail of the ground floor. And the last one, we will see it now, change this small, in this case, settlement built with modern principles into something different, with a central square surrounded by blocks, which are not traditional urban blocks. They are more lower blocks, lower platforms with higher building on top of it. And in this case, for instance, we were talking before about the idea of densification. This, I think it's more than doubling, I think, the densification, maybe even too much, but anyhow. So from this former condition, the idea, well, they kept those 3 buildings, just demolishing 1 bar. And they decided to have 1 central square, and those new small blocks of 2-3 floors that are defining the public space around, that has the dimension of some streets, 2-3 streets, and 1 square at the center. Of course, those blocks, they have all commercial and services activities on the lower floor, and then as they grew, they start having offices and also residential. And this is, well, they are not so all interesting like this one, but this is the most interesting section. I think they have, you see, commerce, office, maisonette over the commercial activities, with the, let's say, garden, shared garden on the top of this block. and then more traditional housing going higher and higher. But I think that this idea of also of combining different types of typologies is an interesting exercise. Also to attract different people, different needs, different social levels and everything. And the last point is about networks and infrastructure, because we know, and that's the same in all cases, that one of the biggest problems is to break the idea of enclave that those areas have. And that can happen by working on a maybe strong central route, or maybe with public transport, for instance, or to foster the connection with natural networks, or with a more pattern of streets that are trying to break the borders of this neighborhood. So if we think about the idea of the Grand Ensemble in France, the very first idea was to do something that was different from what was outside the Grand Ensemble, to state that that was another new, powerful and better idea of city. And now if we look at all the French cases, what they are mainly trying to do is to go back and try to erase all the borders and mesh the borders with the surroundings. And on this idea, of course, this project you will know here in Barcelona, the idea of breaking with the new Rambla and a new tram line, which is crossing a former district. But we will concentrate on this case in Antwerp, because I think it's interesting, as they are not going back to the block, they are not going back to the ancient city, they are keeping the idea of modernity, finding a way to solve the problem. So it's beautiful to live in a park. It's less beautiful to live in a park if you have to go home in the night alone. So if you manage, instead of leaving this area by just reaching your house from the borders and never thinking to cross that space, and you demolish the central where there were parkings and an old school never worked, and you add some new volumes and a new street and a bus station at the center, you find a way to break this idea of isolation. And also, by doing so, they were also able, and I also think this is not a radical intervention, because the existing housing were even not touched. So it's just working on the open spaces, densification, and by densification they add this intermediate scale, this human scale that many times was missing in those interventions, where we have then while the architects were fascinated for the scale of the transatlantic scale, but then we discover that maybe the human dimension was still important. And I think that those buildings are able to make a sort of mediation. And from the architecture of those buildings, we can see that they work with the porch, the covered space, a small dimension of a square. So all dimensions that belong to the, let's say, historic city, that are somehow reproduced in a modernist pattern. And by combining those things, they are acting, I think, as bricoleurs, and they are giving new meaning to what they can find here. So this was the okay, I'm a bit late, but I will try to go faster. So the last part of the presentation, it's the last attempt to go back from, let's say, project to solution to design toolkit, and to try to reapply some of those learnings, let's say, in two cases. That are two examples of project in Italy, one working much more on the architectural scale, and the second one on the urban scale. We are here in Rome, in the district of Torbella Monaca. That was a call for ideas open to all universities in Italy. So even though we won the competition, that there's no way they will realize anything of what we designed. But that was a big group, let's say, of some multidisciplinary group. Torbella Monaca, well, you can see this more or less the center of Rome. It's far, very far from the center, in the countryside, poorly connected to the main city. And this is the last big intervention in Rome, for sure, probably also in Italy. It was completed in 1984. It was designed in the 70s, but they started the construction in the 80s and finished in 84, so in only 4 years. That was the master plan, and we concentrate on this R5 building, which is Redin, that is on one side facing to the Agro Romano, to the countryside, and on the other side to the main road of access. And in between there are those wider courtyard open, more not really, but apparently open to the countryside. And on the other side there are those two smaller squares connected to the city. So that was more or less the idea of the master plan. But then if we look at the quality of those spaces, the quality of the square is incredibly poor. It's a space, only paved space with parking lots and nothing more. And also the internal part, it's abandoned somehow. It's too big. Krier was saying sometimes there is too much public space. And in this case, probably there was too much public space. So those are the two main conditions. And when we faced to this neighborhood, we thought as a strategy, as I told before, to try to find out the minimum interventions. And we found out when we thought that the biggest problem were at the ground floor. So we decided not to care too much at the other level, the upper levels, and we concentrate our actions on the first 2 levels and also the underground level, because there is a peculiar section. This is just to show some conditions that are the conditions that we have everywhere, more or less. I think in Europe we have, and we found out a strategy based on 6 actions. And also we decided to redraw precisely also the existing condition, because I think that's for architects and urban designer, also being very much specific in redrawing the problems, it's already a way to state what the problem is and to start thinking possible solutions. So those oversized courtyards, we decided to reduce the surface, giving back to the countryside and to agriculture part of the countryside, and redefining the new border by also eliminating the cars from the internal part of those courtyard and concentrating. That's maybe radical, but we concentrate the car in other points in the district instead of having them immediately the ground floor of each house. And by also working on the renaturalization, of course, of the internal part. Okay. Then the second point was a work on the ground floor, which was introverted. There were no entrances, just few entrances, and then the distribution was from the inside, and all the ground floor were basic apartments that were separated from the street with this section, which is a hole on the garage. So we decided that this had to be completely transformed. And on one hand, we decided that all the entrances to the main stairs need to face also to the street. And that was kind of easy. It was simply eliminating 2 loggias of 2 apartments, and that was directly open. And also that all the other apartments of the first 2 floors and the first underground could become cluster housing or duplex, or also housing that were really pushing to combine home and work activity. Also adding new volumes that were going outside the former footprint of the building, also to get a lower scale while walking in front of the building itself. And this is more or less what we were expecting, to have a much more permeable and open front to the city. Some duplex and activity. Of course, all the refurbishment has to take in account the tunnel technique of construction, and a difference in the before and after ground floor that in our proposal becomes permeable and open to the street. And then, of course, all the climate risk and car streetscape that is transformed into something different, much more permeable, and with, let's say, better quality in the use of space and in the climatic response of spaces. And I finished this project with this section of the idea of an incremental transformation that is step to step highlighting the most important activity. Let's say like having a bit more budget and a bit more budget, then you can increase more density on the last floor and then facade and in this way. And as this was a research work, it's not, there's no way it will be built, but it became a book that we decided to call Ground Level Scape, because actually that was finally the main issue and the main topic of this intervention. And now I go to the last few minutes again. We are in Terni, at the center of Italy, near Perugia, and we are in the district, the San Valentine district. That's the real San Valentine. His body is buried 100 meters from that district. They are very proud. And this opportunity came thanks to the Next Generation EU funding. So this is an intervention that we could develop together with the technical office of the ATER Umbria, which is the public housing company of Terni. And this was the former neighborhood of the 60s, 11, I think, linear building, one similar to the other, two typologies, one with the gallery and one with two stairs, just repeated one face to the other. And well, and this photo, nice photo, we have one of the empty building because a part of the building were not inhabited at the moment. And on the back, the Certosa, the church where there is the San Valentino body. Those are some photos on the portion of the neighborhood we worked on. There were three buildings that were almost empty, on the way to become completely empty. On one of those buildings, the red one, there was an attempt to do a refurbishment, but they failed 10 years ago, so they decided to, it was, well, no way to recover it again, so they decided to demolish. So in this case, we could not have the opportunity to discuss when we were defining the intervention on which, if keeping or not, and which part was to be kept or not. That was mandatory, let's say, from the company. They wanted to demolish the first three blocks on the right side, but well, the main reason was because they were empty and in the poorest condition, so it makes sense, I would say. But that gave us the opportunity to rethink completely the relation from this neighborhood with the rest of the city, because although they are very much connected, not connected, they are very much near, they do not there's no dialogue between inhabitants and between the spaces of this neighborhood with the houses that are maybe just 10, 15 meters close to them. So we thought that we had the opportunity by demolishing those typologies that have, well, like the others, apartment from the ground floor to the last floor. So we had the opportunity to break the monofunctionality, to break the idea of enclave, to try to have a more better quality of the open spaces, provide some commercial spaces and some more flexible typology. Well, and okay, some other points that I can skip. So we thought, how can we imagine a new morphology that can be able to not be part neither of the former, or to be both part of the former district and also have a dialogue with the rest of the city. And we start working, and we decided to completely change this idea of bars. So instead of continuing with this idea of Siedlung, we decided to try to transform that in a neighborhood, in a district, and adding two elements. One, that it's parallel to making a parallel street with the buildings that are outside the neighborhood, and the other one that's making this sort of rotation that was helping us to have different open spaces. So that was the former structure with the blue parts are the former streets, the car streets. So we decided to change the way that the neighborhood was crossed by cars in every part and in every point. Adding a hierarchy, we have one only street that can cross from one side to the other the neighborhood. All the others become only way to park the car in the red part, and the upper part becomes a unique part with the green lines that stay close to the small river, defining a new open space. So by doing these two small rotations and changing completely the morphology, we thought it could be a way to define new open spaces for the entire neighborhood, and also to give a new meaning to the entrance from the city to the neighborhood itself. And if we look at the ground floor, you see that in this case they were all apartment at the ground level, and by making this transformation, now we have this big space which is that will be used for commercial and services spaces, and all the other ground floors, they are still residential, but they work with the duplex typology, like in the examples that we saw before. Well, permeabilities and trees and all the important climate adaptations. And then this section that shows how the two buildings are able to define three new spaces: the cortile trapezoidale, I don't know how to say it in English, the new square, and the garden close to the river. Of course, with the duplex typology that are open directly to this neighborhood dimension open space. The new entrance from the city that it's now showing the new front of those buildings with the commercial part and the possibility to enter easily and more easier in the space of the neighborhood. So now they started with the demolition, and well, we will see what will happen, because we only did the first phase, so we don't know what will be the final architecture. I would like to finish with this image, which is overlapping the two ideas of city, because I think that it's always interesting to think that when we deal with the existing, we have different moments in the history of a place that can be overlapped, and we have a stratification over time, and things can change and keep on changing.
So let me introduce you, Xander Vermeulen. Thanks for coming. We were waiting for you. So now you are the last presentation before our debate, or see you have some time to talk. And let me introduce you that you did this Kleiber project that was awarded with the European Prize of Mies van der Rohe, and probably was a big fact that the intervention in social housing was awarded with an European. So that meant a lot for the subject that today brings us together, is thinking how to reuse and how not to lose these massive complexes of social housing. So Xander, thanks for coming, and we'll listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be back in Barcelona. It's also I'm here because I share the commitment to the topic of today, of which Kleiber is kind of a happy accident that happened to me early in my career as an architect with my own office. This was my first project I stumbled upon through some connections I had with turned out to be my clients of the project, and been quite instrumental in shaping my thinking about it. You get to do a project like that, and then it kind of grows on you, and it changes your way of thinking. And I think the interesting thing, the presentation that Fabio just gave, you can get a kind of a bingo map with all his interventions, and you can pick them up. Because in our project there are a lot of them. I recognize a lot of them. And I call my presentation critical appreciation, because I think the project is is urban heritage that kind of constitutes the majority of our European cities, then also in architecture we've gone through kind of a roller coaster of critical thinking about them, from a very naive, optimistic kind of thinking when they were originally built, to a very kind of harsh and not very substantiated negative criticism of them, I think from the 80s, 90s onwards. And then maybe also with the topic of today kind of showing that, kind of a more nuanced and more appreciative but critical appreciation of this heritage that we have and how to deal with that in the decades to come. Because if we have to deal with all these challenges that are facing our cities, it's the majority of the buildings that we have to deal with are these buildings that are from the post-war area, I think. And so I think I thought let's start a little bit about the kind of the legacy, kind of the urban history of the place that Kleiberg is sitting in, namely in the Bijlmermeer area, which is kind of an extension to the southwest of Amsterdam. And although the kind of modernist logic that informed the design of the area. Yep. Oh, sorry. I'll try to juggle both things then. The ideas of the modernist architects like Le Corbusier, the typical extreme example, were kind of so bold and so they believed in them so much that they could they said, well, it can replace the existing city. We can kind of bulldozer it away and we can replace the city with these grand ideas. I think, as was also shown in the earlier presentations, effectively, all these ideas were used to build new parts of the city, completely disconnected, apart from the city, and as in the case of the Bijlmermeer, which is here, this kind of completely disconnected piece of the city. There was actually a different municipality between the main body of the municipality of Amsterdam and this small island of kind of a satellite municipality of Amsterdam. The city grew incredibly, and this modernist thinking, and later on this kind of more, let's say, postmodernist thinking, was projected not on the city that was already there, but on the new city that was extended, added on to the existing city. And this is the context for the Amsterdam. This was the Bijlmermeer. Meer means lake in Dutch, and this was a former lake, which there was a big dike around it, and they pumped out the water in typical Dutch fashion. You get a complete flat table landscape, which becomes agricultural land, and on that landscape they projected this new neighborhood in the middle of nowhere. Conveniently in the middle of nowhere, this was a great tabula rasa situation in which you can project your ideal city without any interference of history or existing populations. It's just a clean slate of paper for you to project your perfect city on. And Kleiberg is this little kind of question marks formed thing, one of the big blocks which constituted this neighborhood. And the ambitions were grandiose in a certain way. This was going to be the city of the future. This was going to be the perfect example of kind of a scientific urbanism, using the most modern industrial construction techniques to make the city of the future, the kind of paradise on earth. And this is an image from our project, from Kleiberg. You see the kind of the scale of the building. It's 400 meters long, and it was going to be part of that project. And it was also, and I think that was also been touched upon earlier today, this evening, it was also designed as a kind of an ideal standard for the ideal core family. That was mentioned also, the kind of the standard family with father, mother, 2.3 kids or whatever. And for that, these people that were given these new houses, they were designed for them, not with them. Nobody asked any questions. The architects, the professionals designed these perfect houses for them. Kitchen, cabinets, everything in place. An example house built to show you how to live there with all the modern furniture there, just to, you can just drop in and live the perfect life that has been designed for you. So in the end, a kind of paternalistic attitude in a way. And of course, as with the ambition of these projects that have been built there, there was also this really ambitious project to also demolish them again. This is a book from René de Graaf, 4 Walls and a Roof. Maybe you read about it, you heard about it or read it. And he has this kind of visual history of the demolition of the modernist project as a kind of second big project in the European city in the post-war period. And this happened to the Bijlmermeer too. you can write books, and people have done it about the analysis that led to this demolition, but in the end, all that's red has been demolished, so it's approximately 75% of the original Belmarmere. Fabio showed this little part in one of these reference projects in the previous presentation. And Kleiberg was one of the few projects that remained. I think pointed here. So this square of the original urban fabric remained as kind of one kind of solitary reminder of the Belmarmere as it was. And Kleiberg is, by a stroke of chance, is the one of the bottom right corner. And Kleiberg couldn't stay as it was, of course. Kleiberg had to be improved. Kleiberg had also kind of a showcase of one of these ugly buildings, poorly constructed as it was thought, with large spacious apartments, but for the rest there was a lot wrong with it. So the Social Housing Association called in the American architect Greg Lynn to kind of come up with a solution for all the problems of Kleiberg. And apparently in his analysis, this was the solution. This kind of really curvy, baroque-ish, shapy extra facade. It kind of neatly fits into Fabio's kind of thickening of the facade methodology, but it actually doesn't do anything. It just is kind of a decorative addition to it. There are some escalators in it, leading you from nowhere to somewhere, but it's not really a solution to anything. Maybe it kind of obscures your view from your apartment on the 10th floor on the grandiose park. So I think nobody's actually helped with it. And it would cost 70 million euros, which is a crazy amount of money in general, but especially for a project like this. And thankfully, we had a financial crisis in 2008, so it didn't work. It never would have worked, but now it was off the table immediately, which was kind of, I think, a blessing in disguise, because I think nobody would really be very happy with it. But that led to the question: if Kleiberg is not going to be refurbished, what's going to be done with it? Because it was standing there, it had a lot of maintenance which hadn't been done, waiting for this renovation work. So the building was slowly degrading. People were waiting for this kind of input of money and effort to kind of bring it up to level again. And now this doesn't happen. So what do we do next? And then Kleiberg was slated for demolition, because if nothing can be done with it, then we tear it down. And then something interesting happened, because this is no longer a modernist area. This is a place where people live, and people tend to grow on the place they live in. And so local people, the people in the neighborhood, amongst other also architects and urbanists, started to protest. Verzet is resistance in Dutch, against the demolition of Kleiberg, because they saw, if we're going to tear down Kleiberg, we're going to tear down this cornerstone of this last remaining fragment of the Belmarmere. And with that, we would kind of lose the completeness of this piece of urban heritage. So you see a kind of a change in appreciation from kind of a professional view of this area as being rotten and there is no possibility to do something. We now see the appreciation of the neighborhood, which affected and influenced my client in the end, Martijn Blom, one of the guys I shared an office with. And after a kind of a joking newspaper headline, Belmer flat for sale for €1, which was actually the case. A director of the Housing Association said, after questions by a local journalist sympathetic to the protesters, is there any way to save it? If somebody has €1, the director said, he can buy it from me, because it would cost 7 million euros to demolish the whole thing. So that would be a great idea. So Martijn Blom and 3 project developers came together, said, we pitch in 25 cents each. We'll buy the building from them, and we'll show them that we can maintain this incredible 500-unit housing block and maintain it as affordable housing, and also show that this piece of city is very has its qualities which we should not overlook. And they did that by being kind of throwing out the rule book and do it in a completely different way. And that kind of touches also on Fabio's first statement. I think doing as little as possible is maybe the most effective. That in our case became kind of the mantra of the project. it became a klusflat, a do-it-yourself apartment building. We said that if we want to make housing for people, we better let them decide what the right house for them is. So if they do it themselves, behind the front doors, then we only have half the project left, so half the project was off our hands. And then what remains, we only do as little as possible. We only do what we think is absolutely necessary and absolutely critical in order to get this project, give this project a second lease of life. But yeah, and this became so effective in the end that when I show people around, people sometimes ask me, what did you actually do? They don't even see it. And I think this kind of touches on a kind of a new thing in sustainable design, circular thinking, which I think in the three first steps in that are the most interesting: refuse, rethink, reuse, which kind of actually say, question your action. Question, do you need to do anything at all? If you already keep what you have, and if you are in touch with that, then you get the best effect. And as architects, of course, we are kind of complicit in the whole construction industry. We need to design, we need to intervene, because that gives us the projects that we like. So questioning the amount of work that you need to do is, of course, a bit going against the grain, but I think a very good one and effective one. And Lacaton and Fazal are a very kind of proponent of that thinking too. So in order if you want to keep what you have, but you want to, in the end, go hit this, you have to critically appreciate what you have. You have to look what's good, what's bad. Fabio again mentioned this strategy also already. Appreciate what is there, value the things which have value, go beyond kind of a superficial appreciation. It's concrete, it's dirty, it's ugly, I don't like it. But actually dig deeper, know what you're talking about, but at the same time be critical. Don't make a restoration, don't kind of put it on a pedestal and say, oh, this is the greatest example of modernist housing. In modernism, there were some grave errors in thinking about the city, as we know now. But there's also a huge amount of quality that has been built. In Kleiberg, all the apartments were at least 60 to 70 square meters, spacious, very open. It would be an absolute waste to throw that away. And so I'm a little bit less, let's say, polemic as Lacaton and Fazal, as they say, never demolish or never remove or never replace. I think you need to replace sometimes and remove sometimes and replace sometimes. But the base attitude is, of course, I wholeheartedly underscribe. And in the end, as I said, for us, that led to our approach, which was set behind the front door. We leave it to the inhabitants. We leave it to them to get to that floor plan that they want, to get to the level of finishing that they like. Don't kind of fall into an institutional trap that there's somebody with a rule book who said it needs to be at least this or at least that, and then it starts to become very expensive and very complicated. But just keep it very simple, and keep it to the people that need to live there themselves. And what we do is we kind of fix the functionalist dogmas, so the disconnect between street, between public space and the building itself. The way you enter the building, there was this kind of split entrance system with an internal corridor on +1, so you would never actually touch the ground floor in the building. But for the rest, do as little as possible. This was kind of from the marketing campaign to be straight. This project was sold to the project developers by the Social Housing Association, and then we developed it as a for-market development. And your issue about how do we maintain affordable housing, affordable in the long term, if we did anything wrong in this project is that we didn't kind of keep the affordability in the project. This was put on the market at the time, and then the housing market kind of made its thing with it, and now the houses are 2 or 3 times as expensive as we put them on the market for originally, which is a big shame. Ideally, we should have made a kind of a housing co-op from it to maintain its affordability, but we kind of missed that opportunity. For us, that meant, and I think this is also interesting, and you mentioned it also, this is not only about architecture, this is also about organizing your political framework, organizing your financial framework, thinking about it in time. And this is, for us as architects, has been very interesting. I think that's also why this Mies van der Rohe Award has been granted to the project, and with that also to the civil servants that made it possible, and to our clients that came up with the idea, and to everybody that contributed to it, because it's this whole collaboration of all these expertises that make this possible. So I, as an architect, put the term business case in the presentation because it is fundamental to get this project done in this way, to make it as affordable as social housing. It is not a social housing, but it was as affordable, and something which is not very many times possible within affordable housing. Give people the opportunity to make it their own, to give them the room to build their own dream in this project. And by doing this, so we removed everything in the apartment that was kind of fixing the use in the apartment in place. So we took out all the concrete internal walls. They were all concrete walls. There was a huge amount of work to tear them out. We renewed all the main plumbing and ventilation shafts to get them to a kind of new sustainable level. And we improved the quality of the facade by putting all kind of this high quality thermal insulating glass in it. And for the rest, this was how the apartments were handed over to the future inhabitants. Just an empty, gutted apartment, and then it was up to them. We offered them the opportunity to connect apartments. This was a kind of a typical 67 square meter unit with a balcony on this side and an entrance corridor on the outside on the other side. So we gave them the opportunity to make more openings. We made them for them because the building was so thinly engineered that you couldn't just do it anywhere, because otherwise the whole building would collapse. We actually forbade people to drill electrical plugs into the wall, because they would cut through the 1, 2, 3 wiring bars in the concrete, and if they would do that, that would kind of have a negative effect. You could either horizontally connect the apartments or vertically. This happened. This unfortunately did not happen. Apparently it was too expensive to do that. And we gave them the opportunity to replace the existing window frames with new ones. Just solid glass or single doors or double doors or sliding doors or kind of these harmonica doors, or even a recessed door, so you could get a kind of a loggia next to the gallery or to your balcony. And with that, we kind of give people the room to adjust the facade to the floor plan that they envisioned. And that happened, and that led to this kind of incredible mix of a standard type, kind of this ideal standard, which became a kind of an open framework. And then this happens. The great thing is the balcony of the kitchen, and you see all this kind of this huge mix of floor plans. And this is just a small selection of the ones we could document, but I'm for sure that there are 500 completely individual apartments now in the building. Again, not by doing it ourselves. I could never have designed 500 different floor plans like this, but the inhabitants solved that problem for me. Which also, not alone in floor plans, but also in kind of look and feel of the apartments, became very different from these kind of more urban, rugged, urban chic apartments to this very smooth, plastered, slick apartments with some design furniture in it, to this more kind of artistic spatial interventions that a colleague of mine put into the building on the upper floor, because he also made this small roof extension. That was 50% of the project. Now the other 50% of the project was more addressing let's say the communal parts of the building. I already touched on the facade. And we did a little bit more than only touch the ground floor, although that was a big issue. We actually kind of took up the entire, let's say the infrastructure in the entire project by placing some external elevators which had been added in the 80s to the building. The building is from 1973, by the way. Adding it inside the building, so the kind of the huge monumental shape of the building was kind of re-established. There were a lot of small openings, which kind of were the kind of leftovers from an initial idea to have this building stand on pilotis, like Le Corbusier's Unités d'Habitation. But then economic factors hit, and in the end, there were just some small pinprick holes underneath the building left. We kind of closed all the small ones and kind of assembled them in a couple of big ones, which kind of fit the urban scale. And because our building was standing empty, because it was slated for demolition and was emptied for that purpose, we were able to reprogram it by placing all these internal storages, the private storages of the apartments, on the upper floors, so we could free up the entire ground floor and reprogram it with small business units, with housing again, and with that re-establish the ground floor connection with the building. So from this, it became that. From this very problematic ground floor condition, this was this internal street. This was kind of the connection point from a communal parking garage to we made that with extra front doors from Fabio's rule book. We made these bicycle storages. We reprogrammed the first floor with housing so we could have this connection to the street. And these openings, this was the biggest one actually. This was a cycle path. You really, this yellow black marking is not there for nothing, because if you were a little bit of a taller guy in Holland, you would hit your head. So we kind of cut it open, made it twice as high, twice as wide, and with that kind of mimicking the big highway, kind of subway line on pilotis that's cutting through the area. And with that, we kind of reshape these new urban relationships, and effectively from this level upwards, so this was all kind of kept as it was, and this part has been redone quite extensively, but again in such a way that it kind of blends into the original building, and nobody actually, although the intervention is quite dramatic, in a way, from a technical point of view, it's very, yeah, let's say elegantly and almost innocuously blended into the existing building. Some people see our project as a brutalist appreciation project, which it is in a sense that we kind of made all the concrete of the building this kind of beautiful, almost natural stone-like quality concrete. That's this quality that's coming from industrial construction technology of that time already. We kind of discovered that beautiful concrete underneath all layers of paint, and we were kind of testing it if the quality of the subsurface was good enough to repaint it. And then when we blasted the original paint away, this kind of beautiful concrete we found, so we decided to kind of blast away the paint everywhere and just make the building as concrete as it originally was intended to be. But it was kind of a brutalisme trouvé. It was never intended. It was kind of found during the project, and I think that touches on this bricoleur attitude that was mentioned earlier. And in the end, we kind of, the funny thing is, we kind of re-established the original dreams of the Bijlmermeer in a strange way. So instead of, we kind of went back to the original idea in a sense, this huge monumental elements in a landscape park, which was used for recreation, for meeting, for just living outside and having the fun of that. We established that, but then combined it with a completely different attitude towards housing and the way people engage with their built environment. So we kind of fostered the radical rigidity of the framework, with all these, by the way, all these very well designed seams between the elements. These are kind of made a little bit bigger by the original designer Fop Ottenhoff, just to kind of make this this kind of assembly of elements legible. And yeah, I mean, it's a kind of we kind of found the Siam ambition in our project in a way, and it's funny that 50 years after the fact, Siam turned out not to be such a naive thinking about the city. It kind of apparently needed 15 more years to land. And of course, this is not a universal solution for everything, for everybody, as it was imagined originally, but it shows that it's at least a very one of many types of urban living that can have its specific qualities. Thank you.
Well, now I think we are invited to dialogue. Marta,
aquí està el micro. L'haig d'anar passant? Yes, thank you so much, Pere Joan, Maria, Fabio, and Shander. It was, I mean, very interesting, all the presentations. Yes, so we're talking today about the working class conditions, not in the housing stock in Europe. I mean, seeing, I mean, local for us, for the three of us, I mean, solutions in Catalonia and in Europe. And yes, so I think one statement that came from all of you, and I think it's a very contemporary statement, is this Lacaton Bassar's idea of, I mean, keeping instead of having the tabula rasa. But at the same time, so all of you mentioned that the problem of segregations and all the problems of these housing states that were keeping these working class people in the cities. And also at the same time, you talk about the huge ambition of the modern movement to, I mean, doing this kind of neighborhoods. And yes, I would like to ask, so do you think that it's good to lose these ambitions nowadays, or what's the role of the architect? So 50 years ago, maybe the architects thought that they could change capitalism or the way working class people was living. So what do you think after the global financial crisis that we added also the idea of austerity in our projects? What do you think is the role of us from the academy or from the administration or from the offices? What do you think should be our ambition to provide, I mean, better life for the people in our cities? Sorry. I mean, it came from what you said. So I was so I'm improvising the questions from what you mentioned in the presentation.
Someone has to start. And people optimistic, refreshing from where I come from, which is the daily problems of the administration. The administration tends to anticipate always the problems. Knowledge is used to anticipate the problems. But I think there's another type of knowledge, which is from the creative professions that can change minds in the administration. I would only like to say that while you were saying, how do we make it for people to refurbish their apartments? How do we help private initiatives also to make this happen? The market is transforming a lot, it's refurbishing a lot of but for our purposes, not for dwelling, but for so maybe I think the example here is to or the question the issue here is to make a business for the treatment of
I think it's as I mentioned in Kleiberg I stumbled upon, and it's kind of one of these happy accidents that happen in history, on this kind of set of conditions and of a set of clients and kind of inspired group of people that led to the type of interventions that we did, the kind of unconventional interventions that we showed. And of course, we would have loved to scale it up to do it many times, but we also noticed that that doesn't work. So our business case worked for our project, but it wasn't a scalable example, unfortunately. And that's, I think, the big question, also the big challenge, that if you work, if you want to have a kind of a strategy which applies to mass housing for the people, so to speak, who are in themselves not probably able to intervene in that world actively. In the sense, we have to organize something for them. We can either, I think we scalable solutions, we should kind of be able to do it on a big scale, because that's the question also, to do it on a big scale. But at the same time, and I think that's the lesson we should learn from these kind of modernist thinking, we shouldn't do it with one solution. It should be kind of a whole say, ecosystem of solutions, a kind of a field of different colored flowers that kind of all pop up and are facilitated in the city. And I think to organize that from a municipal point of view and from a professional point of view, not to kind of look at the one single solution that fits all. And I think your presentation showed kind of multiplicity of types of interventions. I would say that that's kind of on one hand need this kind of diversity and variation, but at the same time organize that in such a way that you get to this bigger amounts that you need to have. And as a humble architect, I'm not in the position to organize that, but yeah, I think we can learn from history that there's not one single solution for this big wicked problem.
I think that probably one other point that is overlapping what you were saying is that there's this issue between people, society, and architecture. So some cases, well, we could say, I think, it's not popular, but that we came out with concentrating the weakest part of the population in the same places. And that is turning to be a problem. Because what we have seen in the playbook probably worked because there were a way to bring other people to the whatever, but they were not the same people for the street. So that was working also as a mixing, sort of mixing. So this is the point in, I think, so I think this is a point on which we should think a bit more, because sometimes we say, and it was mentioned also, some regulation says when we work on those districts, there's the right for the people to stay in the place, which is nice, which is against gentrification. But at the same time, it's not solving one former problem that was concentrating the weakest part in the same area. And sometimes we give architecture responsibilities that are maybe not only of architecture. So I don't know. I think at a certain moment we should try to go over some ideological positions and understand if we think on one hand that social mixity is good, and if we also think on the other hand that it's a right for people to stay in the same place, those two things, we have to find a way to make them work together. And if we don't want to densify because environmental, I don't know how this can be solved, but I think that those elements need to be faced together with the architectural strategy, because the architectural strategy can work or can be a failure also according to that decision, which is a management decision.
Yeah, I'm when working on Kleiburg, I could not evade looking into the history of Kleiburg, in which in the Bijlmermeer this kind of social condensation of, let's say, the weaker parts of Dutch society also happened. But the funny thing is, I'm still not sure if it actually was the kind of the mistake of the Bijlmermeer itself that it happened, because there was this funny kind of coincidence that when Kleiburg was finished in the mid-70s, we also had this kind of reappreciation of the existing historic city, which kind of popped up. I don't know if it was bound with the building of new neighborhoods outside of the city, but the inner city of Amsterdam was an absolute dump at the time, and remained a dump until the early 70s. And somewhere in, I don't know why exactly, but from mid-70s, early 80s, the inner city was kind of refound as a nice place to live. So everybody that was able to move, let's say, back to the city did so. And only the people that were not able to move, they remained in the Bijlmermeer. So the fact that this concentration happened was also by kind of a lack of mobility of the people that might have also wanted to move, but were not able to move. I don't know if that's an issue or kind of issue that we can solve as architects from a spatial intervention point of view. So I would love to have this kind of magic stick in my hand as an architect to design these problems away, but I think there's this whole wicked set of issues that contribute also to these things.
I have had an idea. I think from here we have to organize a meeting of Fabio and Chandler and Pejuan with the Sareb. Sareb, for those of you who... Exactly, I'm going. The Sareb is the bank that took all the toxic actives, all the toxic housing that was not sold in 2008. Mostly unfinished buildings. There is an opportunity here. I mean, we always say it's difficult. Okay, but some property owners are more difficult than others. And Sareb has one potential. It's that they are owners of vertical properties, meaning that they own entire buildings that are derelict. I have visited some of them because as Incasol we bought some of these. It's amazing. Some of these buildings were left in 2007, so 2008 during the crisis. There have been occupations, there have been all sorts of activities, fires, and it's and what happens is that we haven't found yet the method to intervene in this. Now there are lots of vulnerable people that squatter because they have no alternative, with incredible solutions. I think one of the difficulties of the city is that nobody looks at poverty. Poverty is still invisible, and more in the 21st century. If a city center that has heritage, that is affluent, if the neighbors see that there's an empty building, the issue will appear on the media, everybody will talk about it. In the other districts, it never appears. So putting this into the agenda, and I think we have to start, my imagination and from your cases also, I think there's a lesson here, and we have to start by the property owners that have vertical properties. Because if you are able to have only one interlocutor, only one client, then the issue is another one. And also because if your developer understood that there was an opportunity here, it is because empty, the building is worthless. And also, I don't know your countries, but in Spain, urban planning gives rights to property owners, but it also implies obligations. And one of the obligations is to keep the maintenance of the building. And I think there is a case here to foster.
Well, in fact, we face a big contradiction between some massive complexes getting obsolete and lack of maintain and with a lot of social problems, and then the lack of housing for our young people they cannot find. So I don't know if it happens in Italy or in Holland in the same situation, but in Barcelona it's amazing. This opportunity of facing your example, your case of working, is trying to find solutions, because it seems only here that it's either you demolish or you restore it, and then there is much more possibility of facing the problem, and then administration can look at this situation not as a problem but as an opportunity, as a potential of applying for a circular economy and trying to give apartment, to give housing, to all these people that is really lacking a place to live.
Well, I think in Holland we have also issues of affordability of housing and accessibility of housing. by young people, by people with limited financial possibilities. And we had this incredible kind of a research group started by architects who just who kind of made a list of all the available space in Holland for whatever use, empty hotels, empty office buildings, empty farm buildings, what you name them. And if they made a whole list of that and put all the spatial needs of the new generation next to it. And they found that in Holland we have all the space already there. We don't need to build anything else more in order to house everybody. You of course have to accept that you live somewhere 40 kilometers from nothing because there is an empty barn which could house somebody, but nobody wants to live there. There are some issues there, but being creative with what's already there and maybe not seen or not appreciated, and which can be rethought, it can solve a lot of problems without you actually need to build anything new, in many cases. Using Fabio's box of tricks.
Yeah, no, I think that this issue of affordability, it's something that it's becoming a problem in most of the big cities. Barcelona, but Milan have the same problem. Amsterdam have the same problem. And it's also true that we have empty buildings, but they are not in the places where we would like to reach them. And also the connection, sometimes if I look at the case of Milan, the connection to reach the immediate let's say small areas around the city, they are sometimes very bad. So there also if we look at, for instance, at the prices of housing, that says something. By driving 20 minutes, 25 minutes from the very city center to the 30 minutes driving, you can pay a house 1/5, 25%, 20%. But those 25 for 30 minutes make a big difference because the quality there, it's not enough, because there are maybe villages where nobody wants to live anymore because there's nothing, there are no, but this is also something which is connected because nobody goes because there's nobody. So I don't know how, but imagining that something can be activated and finding a way to restart, maybe not a community, which is maybe ideal, but a group of people, citizens that decide to live in a place and make those minimum density of people that has enough services around that could do something. But now we are in this sort of loop, I think.
I think it comes to me then if we would cannot not invest in buildings but in public transport to connect these places, the kind of economic boom that you could unlock there would be incredible. And I think that so maybe the solution is not building or rebuilding, but just making sure that places are connected and part of a bigger whole.
And then I think from the society advances. Sometimes Trump wins, but we must not lose faith in that progress will find its way. And I think society has, from the modern movement, has also evolved in positive ways. Maybe the stigma of those of these neighborhoods has diminished because young people are more open to all sorts of things, because we understand that we will live during our life in different cities, different places. In this changing environment, what I find really interesting of Fabio's research is the possibility to introduce different type of housing in the same block, meaning the gardens. The possibility to have a typology that has a small garden for families with children, that can boost the fact that somebody with a different salary decides to move because of that opportunity. No? And I think the mixture here is something that can exploit, that should be exploited. Still, we haven't found the method, but if we can change the morphology of the building, the method will come for sure. No?
I like the expression you use, Chandra, about to re-love a place, no? To re-love a building. Learn how people, because
most of times it's not just a matter of being constructive conditions or lack of isolation or lack of, it's just the illusion, no, that you can love a place. You like to live in this place because I don't know why, because you feel is the right place that with your family or with your whatever, no, you wait, you know, and then some of those massive complexes are being abandoned, not because practical things, just because you don't feel like living in this. No? It's being slowly abandoned. It's far away. It's not central. Nobody wants to go there. No, and that leads to obsolescence and to diminish the attraction. No, it's not an attractive place. So how are our developers, private, like in your case, I think was a private developer, or the administration, like a public investor, has to make this operation of getting those places being attractive for people, so people can re-love. No, this idea of love again. No, it's not. I've been abandoned by this place, but then I can initiate a new relationship. I think that's a.
Maybe in the Catalan context, we have been unable to change, to retrofit a small building or to be more flexible in design terms. But it's true that the transformation of the old city of Barcelona, in a way, was this type of thing. It was, you have a sort of neighborhood with all sorts of historic of buildings, past and present, but the operations of introducing new buildings and that amazing architecture, really good design quality architecture, that made the shift, and that made people think that it was possible to gain the city again. And we must not dismiss the power of design and morphology. And maybe if people were aware of these examples, not keeping it only for the professional discussion, but showing it to normal population, to everybody's normal, to population, not professional, in the field of architecture, that would raise an interest, I think.
I think that you touched a very important point by talking about the idea of stigma, because stigma is something not material. It's linked to idea, to perception, to storytelling, but it's really indeed affecting a lot our actions. So sometimes we risk to tear down a place with all the connection to environmental, economic, and whatever, because we are not able to overcome a condition of stigmatization. And I think that projects like the one you did and some few others, for instance, they are really able to overcome the stigma with providing good examples. So I think it's easier to do such interventions after the one you did, after the Park Hill in Sheffield. There are 3 or 4 important, or if you visit the Unité d'Habitation in Marseille, if there are, but it's really a limited number, maybe 5, I don't know. There is a very small number of, but I think that probably, I don't know, but maybe the idea of Clayburgh, I just guessing, maybe it also came after seeing somebody saw what happened in Park Hill. That was probably one of the first intervention of accepting again to go and live in a big concrete modernist block. That was out of the mind of anybody. But if you start changing the storytelling and convince somebody that it's a community, like going outside of the city, a community that can live in that context, in that building, then things can change a bit. So I think there's a important work on immaterial idea, on perception, on reloving, on giving importance to the idea that it can be nice to live there.
I think the examples you showed also, I think the Europark in Antwerp is a big example of that you don't, if you're very specific and very precise in where you intervene and how you intervene, and it can only touch maybe 10% of the whole area, this can have such an oversized effect on the entire thing that, like in Europark, they didn't touch the buildings. at all, but just they put something in the middle of it all, and that kind of had this kind of aura touching all the buildings around it. And so you don't have to, and that's the kind of this big demolition project that Renier de Graaf in his book shows. You maybe have to demolish 10% or rebuild or redo 10% to have a big effect on the whole thing. So that also, I think, from a kind of a municipal point of view, and I think it's a design question. Where do you do what? That's a design issue. If you can be very precise in that and open-minded also, and just accept that a lot of things that you see might be not perfect, but they're pretty good. So let's keep them that way. And you touch on the 10% that are problematic, then you can do much more than you think you can do.
Talking about stigmas, I think the block, in a way, is in the mind of people, at least in Spain, as those ages of emergency. I found very interesting that intervention in which the block becomes an urban villa. Affluent neighborhoods are full of urban villas. It doesn't cost much more to build an urban villa, but it means that they have light and the sun all the day long because they have la cantonada, como es diu, the corner. And having the apartment in a corner allows for the double of views. No? So that really raises the question, where do we start? Is there a typology that really helps or would allow for a different population with more affluent to consider to go and mix itself?
Now it's the time for the public to ask questions. What do you think?
Is there a future for those?
Thank you very much for your presentations. I think they were all very, well, very, I'm getting enthusiastic also about everything that you're speaking, and we have these debates frequently in the research group, and I think a day like today is very enriching, no sé cómo, I don't know, inspiring, yes. But now that you were talking about stigma and we were also talking about, well, we were in the morning talking about like minimum of precarious housing somehow. And all of the different examples that you were talking about make me think of this idea of trying to solve this kind of minimum and social housing and places that were very precarious and that have also a lot of stigma with generosity, no? So with the opposite kind of approach of what created some of these places. Well, they're not the same. They're certainly very different. But this idea of generosity, flexibility, and breaking a little bit this mindset of minimum existence somehow. I don't know what you think about that. And also thinking that this is also something that we must think for deprived neighborhoods, not only for, so treating deprived neighborhoods as luxurious neighborhoods also. Of course, then there is all the management that needs to, as you said, Chandler, in your presentation, that needs to be linked with these generous operations, because otherwise they're gentrified immediately,
I think it's got to do with creativity and the sense of belonging to a space in which people care about you. You never know where the conditions of an interesting neighborhood can happen. El Poblenou, which was an industrial area for many years, became an interesting area to live. Ciutat Vella, at some point, had very small housing units, or al barri vell de Girona. If you see la Casa Masó has, which is it's a building of the 19th century, has rooms of 2.5 meters wide, and it is one of the most affluent homes of the city center. So the urban tissue can never be an excuse. People come out with interesting ideas to add, to modify, to refurbish. Probably the difficulty is that individually it's impossible to do, or individually can only happen if the people are very affluent. The interesting thing is which is the community, which is the architect, which are the people that can foster this type of change.
What else?
Hi. I have a question. For about Sanders, he said that you could not maintain the affordability in the project. Now, after doing it, what would you do different in order to maintain it?
I have to say, what would I do differently? And I'm having to put my cap on as an architect. I would say I couldn't have done anything as different as an architect. If I put my cap on as a partner in the project that also can think about other realms than architecture, I would have, following the Swiss and Austrian examples of these housing cooperatives in which the group of inhabitants become members of a society that owns the building and rents the building out to its members. Which kind of takes the building off the housing market because the society maintains its rent cost levels. That would have been the right form to organize the ownership of the building, which of course as an architect I have an opinion about, but it's not literally my professional cup of tea, so to speak. But I think these kind of things require, if you want to think about it in a holistic way, then it requires you to think also beyond the realms of architecture. This business case point is there. And actually I have to make a small confession on this point. For 2 months ago, I have sort of stopped with my architecture office, but I've joined one of the biggest real estate developers from the Netherlands, specifically for this case. Because I think as an architect, I'm still working as an architect within this company. It's listed on the Dutch Stock Exchange, so I'm really kind of went over to the dark side. But it's exactly because of the yes. But I joined this company because we recognized the necessity to think through these kind of disciplines, to think about ownership, to think about design, to think about the development process in the broadest sense of the words, to bring all these things together. And to be effective in it, and to be also a kind of a counterpart to the municipality who wants to do these things, but maybe doesn't have the means or the toolkit to actually bring it forward. So it's been a kind of an experiment for me personally to kind of join this kind of group of thinking, but it's this holistic approach, process, business, money, politics, the whole thing, design, all these things together, they kind of in the end make this possible what we want.
I think you can't say I would do the building less beautiful. I would do it awful. And I mean, so it's really out of the domain of the architect. Yeah, that's the point. When you do a beautiful open space that increase the value and that become a problem of gentrification. So that has to be solved. Yeah, from the cooperative point of view, or you could state that you can sell the apartment only back to the cooperative, because the other problem also, when you fix the price and you say that building will have to be sold only at this amount, but then at least in Italy what they do is that okay, the apartment is sold at the original price plus inflation, but the kitchen that I will sell, I'm selling to you as that kitchen, it's 50, it's huge, and the car, and then they find a way to overcome the regulation. So the only way, I think, is to break the direct mediation between the former owner and the new owner, passing through let's say, a cooperative or I don't know who, but somebody should cut. In this way, you can maintain the affordability. Otherwise, I think it's, or you do the cooperative in not divided cooperative, but well, not easy.
I don't know. Was you, Fabio? I don't know. Shande, who said, who wrote this, the greatest achievement with the minimum impact. Both. I think it's applicable to both. So I also think this is a good reflection because it goes against the business, the business. So I'm really spending the as minimum money to get the greatest impact and to offer people with the less cost as possible. No? So that I think that goes directly to being to try to make this apartment affordable and easy for people.
During this afternoon, you have talked about three different kind of neighborhoods that create three different kind of spaces. The Italian ones that are completed with all the in a casa with all its wavy shapes. Then maybe then the Dutch ones with really high buildings, big spaces in front of them, many of them full of vegetation, and then the rational ones that we can find here in Spain. Somehow we have already overpassed that statement from the first years of this century when we considered or when we blamed space to be guilty of all the problems that we could encounter on those blocks. And now we are not saying that space is everything is about space, and we are saying that everything is stigma. And maybe we're blaming stigma, kind of. I mean, there are many other problems, but we're blaming stigma. And I'm asking now, is the stigma the one forming the space, or is the space the one forming the stigma?
We didn't say that everything is about stigma. And we said that not everything is about space, but it's about space, at the same time space, stigma, society, decision that are beside architecture, and also problems brought by architecture. They are all, I think, there together with many frictions. So I'm sorry, I can't answer.
I mean, I think in the case of the Bijlmermeer, this neighborhood looked the same because it had this kind of uniform spatial layout. And in some places in the Bijlmermeer, there were really, really big problems with drug abuse and really kind of all kind of nasty stuff happening. And because the whole neighborhood looked the same, everybody kind of equated these specific problems, mainly focusing around some subway station points, because people from the inner city could go easily to these places and do the nasty stuff and then go out again. They equated that with the entire neighborhood. So also the places which were actually working very well were stigmatized with the bad examples coming from the specific place where things were wrong. And I think if there's anything with the spatial quality of these modernist blocks is that their vast scale and the uniformity of them have kind of made us blind for the specificity and the precision and the delicacy of what's happening in each individual place. And if we kind of look at them from this kind of generic perspective and just look at them, it's an ugly modernist neighborhood, and don't have the attention and the precision and like you said, like you redraw every precise little plant and corner and stone, etc., to really understand how it works, to also see the kind of more ephemeral traces of use, a signpost on the facade which says "Don't pee here," or put your have you found my lost cat or something. All these little things which are also in the space there, but maybe don't belong to the architectural realm. You have to address all of those in order to really understand what's happening in a place like that. And I think then this connection between space and use and stigma, etc., becomes much more fluent and pleasantly problematic.
Thank you. Any other, Marta?
No, I have one question. I mean, regarding the stigma that Aleix was asking. Do you think that stigma can be also related with infrastructure? So with infrastructure dependency. I mean, you introduced the need of the changing of the relation of the infrastructure, and I'm asking this because so I lived in Germany or in Switzerland, and housing states had not the stigma that they have here, for example. And I don't know if it's also because of the sizes of the city, of the and the less need of this infrastructure that we have in very centralized territories as it's Catalonia, Spain, or other countries. And I mean, do you think? I mean, this infrastructural dependency on the main cultural services, for example, universities. I mean, we have universities everywhere in Germany or in Switzerland. So there is a big university in Zurich, and I mean 30 kilometers. So there's Winterthur, Bern, Lausanne, and so I mean all these cultural activities, very important cultural activities, and very important cities, all of them. So makes a change also in order of segregation or stigma of this kind of neighborhood, or is that the morphology?
No, sorry. No. I think it is, and I think again using the Bijlmer example, one of the big mistakes that have been made in the Bijlmermeer, and that has been repeated in later let's say urban extension areas, is that we first started to build houses. And then when all the houses were there and people moved in, we then thought, oh, maybe they might need a shopping center, or they might need a public transport link to the rest of the city. Because we first had to do the private investment in order to generate the money to do the public investments. But because of that, everybody living there was kind of one step behind the rest of the city. And that kind of made it more difficult for people that are maybe more dependent on public transport to connect to the city, to be easily connected to education possibilities, to employment possibilities, which I won't say caused it, but at least not alleviated their challenges in these cases. So I think to bring public cultural infrastructural investments on par with let's say the private housing infrastructure investments, I think that's very important to keep this connection going. If you don't do that, then you kind of organize segregation because of these reasons.
I also think that the connection can be, I like this, what you said, that there can be a connection between stigma and infrastructure and social infrastructure. And also I think that social infrastructure can help overcoming stigma when there is that condition. So it can be, it can be used as a weapon against stigma, I think, to foster the social or also mobility infrastructure. That can be a way to help solving the problem.
I think there is literature about this. There are all sorts of indicators. If the commerces close, or if the commerces change very quickly, people have in the mind that the tendency is going down. The rudeness is important. An indicator of social decay of a neighborhood is when people who increase their salary, who gain a little bit more money, leave the neighborhood. Because then you have the impression that only those who cannot afford to move are the ones living there. So retaining there a significant part of neighbors that everybody recognizes that they live there, they have been living there, that those children can grow up there. I think that's important for even more than the space than the shape of the building. That of course, being an architect, I cannot deny it, but
yes, I would like to. Yes, we have here today the president of the Association of Architects in Barcelona, and I don't know if you want to ask something or.
This is very interesting debate, and I don't know. Congratulations for your research, and I think it's very interesting in the architecture, in the School of Architecture, also in the Association of the Architects. I think this session is linked with the exhibition you have in the Agora of this building. It's very important because the PhD of Sarah Bima is exposed in the order of architects. I think it's very important. The vulnerability, it's also a topic that's very important to approach, and debate in this association, and I think your research is the most important, in our work, and congratulate your work, your research, and to make together this experience to engage more one of these challenges, that it's not easy. Congratulations, and we continue it.
So thank you so much. Sorry.
So if there is not other question, thank you very much for the Colegio to help us in this opportunity. Thanks to our guests, Maria, Fabio, and Chander. Thanks to everybody to be here, members and not members of research of REAQ. And we hope and expect we can repeat this opportunity to talk and learn everybody about rehabilitation and large massive states and all these things that I think our society needs urgently solutions for that. So thank you very much, and see you soon, everybody.